So welcome to this week's podcast. We always come up with ideas for our podcasts as we work with clients. We listen to their questions and frustrations. And something that's been a theme for a while, and we really wanted to address it now, is archetypes. Archetypes mean that you divide up countries. If you're a global company, that you would divide them up so that they are in smaller clusters. And Tom's going to explain a bit more on where we see the benefits of it. But it is a cousin of segmentation as well. But we think it really is one of the keys to organizing chaos and helping marketers do a much better job delivering value. So with that, I'm going to open it up. Tom, would you mind starting us off on this?
Yeah, the problem that archetypes solves, one of the problems, there's several problems that looking at the world or a market and putting it into archetypes, is the fact that whenever you talk to an individual country, let's say you're a global learning and development head, and you're trying to figure out what kind of training resources and capabilities you need to develop. Every country you talk to says the same thing. What is it? They say, well, our country is different. Yeah. Our country is different. You just don't understand. And you get the impression that if you're developing any kind of global capabilities program, that you've got to, according to the people you're interviewing, if you've got 30 main countries in your global market, you've got to have 30 different programs. And there is some truth to that. We're not disparaging the fact that different markets, have different circumstances and different needs. I guess as we've stepped back and looked at it, we found, especially in markets where there's a lot of regulation, let's take pharmaceutical companies, let's take medical device companies, that you can organize the world into sets of countries that have similar regulatory environments, for example. And you might take those 30 countries in my previous example and be able to put 10 of them or so into each of these archetypes. And now what you have the ability to do is to develop relevant, programs for countries that have similar regulatory circumstances. So that's kind of how we use archetypes. I mean, Mary, Sean, what are some of, let's just maybe share some of our medical device kind of archetypes that we see a lot of. Can we do that? We bring in any proprietary?
No, because it is something, for years we kind of use that lens of, if it's more of a government led, which, as you look across, you can see how governments make a lot of the key decisions. There's ones that are more open markets, and then something in between. So, Sean, do you want to add to that, or what's your thoughts?
Well, actually, I'm going to go up a level, because rather than thinking about specifically in the medical world, there's global archetypes, right, which you can start to put countries into, and typically you can do these on two dimensions, which I think, Tom, is where it's similar to segmentation, right? So you could say which countries have a stronger focus on the individual versus a stronger focus on collectiveness, if you like. So a lot of the Scandinavian countries have more of a collective sense that we're all in this together, and taxes are higher, but so are public services, kind of thing, and others that are very individualistic, entrepreneurial types of countries. So you got that as one dimension. You could have another one of people that are more conservative, don't like change, like things the way they are, and people that are always innovating and pushing. So you find these dimensions, and the trick to archetypes often relates to the product or service that you're involved in. So to your point, Tom, if you're in medical, then you might look and say, one of the dimensions might be, how much does government get involved? Look at our two countries. We have the National Health Service, a single integrated socialized medicine. We all pay an amount of national insurance that funds this thing that's free at the point of use for everyone. I've also lived in the US, obviously where you guys are from, and we know there that it's a heavily insurance-based payer market. So you could take that dimension, but that wouldn't be relevant if you're in the banking or finance sector or the insurance, or maybe insurance it would. But you see what I mean? That those dimensions that define archetypes depend on the product or service. And that's part of the key, is finding the dimensions for the archetypes that give you maximum explainability with minimum effort, right? Because that's the other thing that we're trying to do here. We're not overthinking this. We're trying to broad categories.
So one of the things that we talk about a lot of times in our workshops is, how good does this have to be? You know, we're kind of kicking it around. We're going, oh, there's three, and it's kind of like this, and it depends on your industry. The fact is if you are doing anything that brings that discipline into your organization and allows you to communicate across the functions better than your competitors, that's good. You know, it doesn't have to be like, if you're in, you know, the consumers markets and you're selling beer, you know, it probably has to be that much better because your competitors are that much better at their market analysis. But a lot of the industries that we're in, they don't even think about using archetypes or segmentation. So even if you start to apply this to your markets, you're going to have a different way of looking at it that can really help give you an advantage, an innovation advantage. So that's why I think it's it seems simple, but it's such a powerful way to organize.
Yeah, and the other thing is that if you're in global learning and development, you know, your product is your capability development programs, your training programs, right? And a lot of times your success is based on, well, do the individual regions and markets have uptake of these programs? Do they want it? Do they think these programs are valuable? And the closer that you can come to creating your training programs to the market circumstances that the different countries face, the more likely you will have uptake. Well, what we're finding with archetypes is that you know, creating 3 or 4 archetypes that describe, you know, the different circumstances is as Mary said, that's all you really need, because people say, oh, I'm going to be this is a program that's designed for these other countries that I view as peers, as people that I already, you know, reference to because our circumstances are somewhat similar. So, you know, it really helps in the same way that segmentation helps you to create value propositions that appeal to people that are in that particular segment.
I think that's a really strong point, Tom, that whole idea that one of the reasons for archetypes is that positioning element, you know, and you mentioned learning and development. You've got culturally some countries where not knowing, having a deficit in your knowledge is seen as a weakness and something that you should take care of yourself. Other countries, the opportunity to learn and continue to push boundaries is valued, the continuous learning process. So if you've got those two archetypes, one where there's an element of shame attached to not knowing, and one where there's an element of excitement about the potential to learn more, you have to position differently. We will provide you with tools to help you to reach your potential, to drive your own learning, to give you what you need, blah, 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 versus we will take you on this journey. We will show you. And those subtle differences just help engagement, whether you're selling a product in the traditional sense or whether you're an L&D leader who is still selling a product, but you're selling into an internal market, but you still need to position it based on those archetypes. And that's a really powerful point.
Yeah, I think it also in learning development, one of the challenges that team has is sharing best practices. You know, because it always is like, well, what does good look like? Well, if you can find a good example and share it, it's going to be a lot more relevant within a group that has a similar structure. And hopefully you're encouraging them to share best practices among their peer groups because they understand that they have something in common. And it may not be obvious at first, but if as learning development, you can develop a pod or you know, a bucket that says you guys have similar needs, and we're going to set up a best practice sharing program here. And you know, the other buckets have different things that they're sharing because it's relevant in different ways. But that best practices, that seems to be one of the areas that our clients really take advantage of archetypes.
Well, I think everybody within the archetype, when they find out that maybe a particular training program has been successful within the archetype, when countries similar to them, they're ready, you know, so it helps with, again, with this marketing, this internal marketing problem that you can have with training programs, which is how do you increase uptake? How do you get, different markets to be excited about what we have to offer? This is another way to do it. I also wanted, I think what happens, the question begs this whole discussion begs the question, how do I develop the archetypes? And I guess what, in my experience, you guys can comment, it is similar to how you develop a segmentation hypothesis, right? Where you try it, whether it's qualitatively through interviews or quantitatively through surveys, you ask people about their needs, right? And you figure out whether it's a discussion with a customer about a doctor around their needs around a medical device, or it's a conversation with a country manager about developing their team and the kind of capabilities they need. It's the same thing. They start to talk to you about what they need, and if you do enough of that, if you interview enough people or the survey's wide enough, you start to see similarities in needs, right? Similarities in needs define a segment. And so similarly in a learning and development world, similarities of needs around certain capabilities usually are indicative that, hey, if these people need these things, and it's like this one over here, is that part of an archetype?
Yeah.
That's and again, I guess what we found in the medical device and the pharma world is you start talking to people about what they need to successfully market a product. A lot of it happens to be related to whether, am I calling on a hospital chain, a pharmaceutical chain, or if I'm calling on a government, try to get on a formulary or part of a an approved list. And you start to see the similarities between countries that maybe you didn't even think were similar until you started.
Well, I was thinking, Tom, this is, how we used to do segmentation. We've been doing segmentation for 20, 30 years, and we've evolved different methods, and we continually refine. And we said this is similar, but do you remember when we used to start by saying, how can good customers be different? One of the key questions. If you said similar, how can countries or regions be different? What are those dimensions of difference? And it could be heavy government, free market. It could be collectivism versus individualism, whatever it is. You come with a list of them, and you sort of mentally or on a board, you just keep mixing and matching the different dimensions and saying which one makes the most sense. What's relevant to what I'm selling, be it an internal L&D offer or an external product. And you get, I just got excited as you were talking that, we could almost dust off one of our original segmentation tools, which would really work for archetypes, to really allow people to play with those dimensions, to find those quadrants and then populate them. I think that'd be a good way to do archetypes.
Funny, Sean, I love what you're saying, because that was in the back of my mind too. And I think it's important for people to hear what you said about how are two good customers different. The trap that we had even before is where they go, oh, well, we have customers that buy from us and customers that don't buy from us. It's like the whole thing's going to fall apart in about 10 seconds. And the reason that you want to model the good is that then you have those underlying characteristics of, you may have two very big hospitals, but the way they operate, the way they make decisions, the way that they're structured, it's very different. And so understanding those two buckets allows you then to create tools and resources for them differently. So I'm right with you on this, especially with the archetypes, where ideally what you're trying to get at is around 3 archetypes. This is one of those things that more is not always better. It's better to look at what are a couple of big buckets, and it magically ends up being about 3 every time we've done it. So
yeah. Which, by the way, we advocate 3 to 5 segments when we do segmentation too. Any less, and you probably, you might need a little more complexity. 2 segments probably is not quite enough, although I guess we've seen that work. But 6 segments seems to be out of bounds, right? It gets, if you're presenting to even a sales force or anybody internally in the business, a 6-segment approach, wow, it starts to get too complicated. And people are like, how are we going to execute that?
Your head starts to blow up. It's like, no, too much.
Yeah.
And then people do nothing because it's too much. And that is what we see is the more there is, the less, especially because this has to translate to the sales team at some point. And the less complicated, the better there as well. So there's
Well,
a
now,
lot of reasons.
I'm excited now to develop an archetype for a global L&D outfit. That's what's
We
going to
actually
happen between
have
now
one.
and Christmas. I'm looking forward to that, because that this conversation's actually got me excited about the idea too, because it's so powerful.
Yeah, we actually have a archetype for learning development. So we'll dust that off again. So we hope that you, any final thoughts before I close out? All right. So hopefully, if you haven't thought about archetypes for a while, you may think about it again and start to apply it in some way. Talk to some people within your organization and start to play with it and see if it makes sense. If you love it, then put some of the countries into that or markets into those different buckets, and then do a pilot with one of the buckets and see if it makes sense. So anyway, good luck, and we'd love to hear your stories. Thank you.
Thank you.